All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to take a journey, a really deep dive into the past. We usually look at the Great Barrier Reef as this vibrant tropical paradise, right? A total marvel of the modern natural world. But to truly understand it, we've got to do something wild. We literally have to drain away the water and look at it through the eyes of an ancient survivor. This isn't just an ocean we're talking about. It's a drowned landscape, and it holds thousands of years of profound human secrets, standing as a testament to communities who face the absolute terrifying power of an Earth in flux.
To wrap our heads around this, let's consider this incredible insight from Yirinji Elder Gajugadu. He points out that we are talking about 2,500 generations of unbroken human memory. I mean, that is a staggeringly long time. These ancient oral traditions, they aren't just folklore or simple myths. They are highly accurate, multi-generational scientific records that actually chronicle the dramatic reshaping of our planet.
And this epic narrative, it spans absolute epochs. So we start way back, 65,000 years ago, with the very first human footsteps in Australia. Then we hit a massive geological pivot roughly 20,000 years ago, when the Ice Age ends and sea levels just relentlessly rise. Finally, we'll fast forward and contrast this ancient survival with the year 1791. That year marks the catastrophic end of a rigid, heavily armed European warship that completely misunderstood the exact same waters the ancients had mastered. So let's jump right into part one, Memories of a Drowned World.
This ancient history absolutely reframes how we understand the Great Barrier Reef. Picture this. During the last ice age, so much water was locked up in massive ice sheets that the sea level was drastically lower than it is today. This area wasn't a reef at all. Actually, scratch that. It was a vast, dry continental shelf. We're talking about a sprawling coastal plain where massive human communities lived, hunted, and thrived for generations.
Just imagine walking these plains back then. It was an astonishing ecosystem, just teeming with life. Ancestors hunted massive megafauna right exactly where tourists today snorkel among vibrant corals. I'm talking giant iguanas, huge lizards, massive crocodiles, and the early ancestors of wallabies and kangaroos roaming all over the sprawling, dry expanse. And here's where it gets really fascinating. These Aboriginal storytime narratives, they aren't just quaint stories. They are precise geological data sets chronicling these ancient ecological shifts. For instance, Guju Guju shares this story of a great whale becoming stranded. But here's the twist. That stranded whale is actually a mountain today. These narratives meticulously document how the very shape of the Earth transformed right around them.
Moving on to part two, surviving the rising tides.
We can really ground this massive geological event in raw human emotion through the ancient legend of a man named Gunya. As the story goes, Gunya and his wife watched in sheer terror as the unstoppable ocean began flooding their ancestral hunting grounds. In this desperate fight against nature, they frantically heated these massive rocks in a fire and hurled them into the rising waters, praying to make the relentless tide recede.
But of course, the ocean just kept coming. The rising seas swallowed the plains entirely. What we view today as islands, like Lizard Island, which sits about 35 kilometers off the modern coast, well, those are actually the very tops of drowned mountains. The valleys where communities once hunted were now permanently trapped beneath the waves.
But here's the amazing part. Instead of retreating in defeat from this disaster, the Dinkanal people adapted to their newly flooded landscape. On Lizard Island alone, archaeologists have recorded over 1,000 intricate stone arrangements, many shaped like animals. They maintained sacred spiritual sites and left behind campsites completely rich with marine shellfish. They didn't abandon their home, they just learned to live with the ocean. That brings us to part three, canoes versus the reef. The evidence shows us that ancient Australians used highly adaptable, shallow draft canoes to seamlessly navigate this newly formed, really treacherous reef maze over vast stretches of ocean. Their technology flowed right alongside the landscape. Now compare this to the European ships that would arrive centuries later. We're talking massive, rigid vessels with deep drafts that sailed completely blindly into these deceptive underwater geological funnels. Which leads us perfectly into part four, the fate of the Pandora. 700. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of ships this lethal underwater maze of the Great Barrier Reef has swallowed over the centuries. It is quite literally a graveyard for vessels that failed to understand its incredibly complex, hidden topography. So let's look at the HMS Pandora.
This was a heavily armed British naval ship on a ruthless mission to hunt down the infamous mutineers of the Bounty. They had actually successfully captured 14 of the mutineers in Tahiti and were heading back home. But, completely oblivious to the underwater landscape beneath them, the Pandora sailed directly into a lethal geological trap.
Marine geologist Dr. Robin Beeman puts it perfectly. When you look at high-resolution scans of the seabed, it reveals exactly why they were doomed. He says it's like a funnel, and there's no escape. The ship was sounding for depth right beneath its hull, and finding deep water, sure, but they were actually being funneled into an inescapable maze of towering coral walls stretching nearly 80 feet right up to the surface. And then, disaster. The ship struck the jagged reef. It managed to stay afloat overnight, but sank within just minutes the next morning. Now zoom in on the human tragedy playing out on the stern of the ship. The captured mutineers were locked inside a makeshift prison cell, morbidly dubbed Pandora's Box. Artifacts recovered from the seafloor show a massive, sturdy padlock that was completely fractured, chilling evidence of trapped men frantically trying to smash it open as the freezing water rushed in. Ultimately, this disaster claimed the lives of 35 men. They drowned when that heavy warship finally plunged to the sandy, flat bottom. But you know what the darkest irony of this whole tragedy is? Of those 35 men who drowned, only 4 were the mutineers the ship was originally sent to punish. The rigid, unyielding might of the British Navy was utterly defeated by a reef environment that ancient Australians had successfully mastered in simple canoes thousands of years prior. All right, let's bring this all together in part 5, Ancient Wisdom, Future Survival. The indigenous peoples of Australia still hold a deep, completely unbroken spiritual connection to this drowned landscape today. As Elder Guju reminds us, if you've lived on the reef for thousands of years, it is literally in your blood. The spirit of their ancestors remains very much alive on those sunken coastal plains.
So, the really crucial takeaway from our explainer today is one of incredible hope. Ancestral knowledge proves humanity's remarkable capacity to adapt to dramatic, landscape-altering changes. When the world flooded, these communities didn't just survive the disaster, they thrived. They did it by adapting their tools, their ways of travel, and their whole mindset to live in harmony with a radically transformed nature. Which leaves all of us with this final, really vital question. As our own environment rapidly changes today, can we learn to manage the reef? And honestly, our whole world, the way the ancients did. If we can embrace their wisdom of adaptation over rigid force, well, perhaps we can keep both the reef and the stories of those who mastered it alive for another 2,500 generations. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.